going to call to order this September 23rd meeting of the Montpelier Planning Commission. First thing we do is approval of the agenda.
I don't think we'll be, because we don't have
Quorum.
We can't technically do any of the official voting items.
That's absolutely right. So this is going to end up being a work meeting, even if we got, so we have a fourth member, which actually means we have quorum.
We don't have a quorum.
So in that case, we will approve the agenda.
Finally, we can do some work.
We're official now.
I do have to leave early at
Hopefully.
6:45.
Front load the approving.
6:45?
Yeah.
Okay, I think it's possible we'll all get out. It's going to be a lot of updates and things this meeting, but
Okay.
not a lot of action, hopefully. So everyone have a chance to take a look at the agenda? Do we have a motion to approve?
So moved.
Okay. By Aaron?
Can I second?
Mm-hmm. Second by Marcella. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
All opposed? Okay, our agenda is approved. Next item is comments from the chair. The only thing I have to say is that this Wednesday at the city council meeting, there will be the CVRPC appointment. I've sent a letter to the mayor and city council about that, and they know that Marcella is our nominee, our chosen nominee. So should expect that to move along. And I think Mike also had a couple of updates.
Yeah, so this Wednesday is also the zoning fixes that we approved a while back. Those are in their final hearing and hopefully adoption on Wednesday, so.
Okay. So I'll be out of town.
I don't
Do you
expect
think-
anything.
Okay.
It's been the most remarkable set of zoning hearings. They probably had 4 meetings, just meetings before they warned it, and they had no opposition, and we had the first public hearing and nobody came out.
Okay.
So we're confident that it's been pretty quiet, so hopefully this just finishes going through. They're mostly zoning fixes, so they really should be mostly non-controversial anyways, but
Okay.
hopefully that goes through. The second announcement, this afternoon, the downtown board approved our growth center renewal, so that is something that was approved in 2009. So in addition to a designated downtown, you get a growth center. You can have a growth center. We're one of 6 in the state. And so ours, every 5 years, we have to go through a renewal process, and today we went up and did ours and got approved, which is good. And they also approved some addition. There was a request to add Crestview into the growth center, which is up behind Redstone, Terrace Street. Between Terrace Street and State Street, there's a piece of land that's mostly woods. And it had been in the growth center and then was removed from the growth center, and we asked them to put it back in, and they did. So that was a request that had been outstanding for a year and a half, and so it's good we've got that put behind us as well. So
We didn't add in further down Berry Street though, which is kind of also a place where things
Berry
are
Street is
growing.
already out to Sabins pasture,
Including Sabins?
including Sabins.
Okay.
Yep.
The,
So-
that's different than the designated downtown, right? The growth center.
Correct. The designated downtown is the core, and everything builds off of that. So if you were to do a neighborhood designation, do an NDA, or do a growth center, or do a new town center, there's other programs, but they would all attach to the outside of a designated downtown.
What does the growth center renewal mean to us?
It's just another program, another set of tools. The purpose of it is that the city commits to trying to have 50% of the future housing and 50% of the future job growth to happen within the growth center. In exchange for making that growth center, so we want 50% of our activity to happen within what is 16% of our town. So we want to have everything in that focused area. In exchange, the state makes a number of things, cuts down on Act 250. You get a couple other bonuses and benefits, so there are a few other pieces that go in there that it's kind of the reward for going through and helping the state accomplish its goals. It used to be, initially, you had to have a growth center in order to qualify for tax increment financing. So that was initially why we did it in 2009, before I was here. But that was the impetus of it. Is if we have a growth center, we can get TIF, and so nowadays you can get a TIF without growth center. It's just a little bit harder, but you can do it. But that was the reasoning behind it. One of the benefits being kind of an easier road to get the TIF, but it sets you up for some other pieces. But that's kind of the big picture of the growth center. So that got approved, which is good. It's been working well for us. We've been getting about 85 to 90% of our residential growth has been within the growth center, and almost 100% of the new businesses have. So it's been working out pretty well over the past 5 or 10 years. So.
What residential growth has there been in the last 5 years? Oh, I guess down street.
You've got mostly down street projects. There have been a couple of private, smaller projects. Steve Ribellini had one over there. A couple of smaller infill projects that people have done. Not as much as we would like, but it's still better than seeing a lot of other communities that would have a much stronger set of subdivisions going on out in the rural districts, and we haven't had that. So those were the two, probably the bigger things that are going on right now.
I know this isn't exactly in our purview, but I'm curious, what's the update on the court case with the garage? I'd like to ask about that periodically.
That's a good question.
It is, so there was the project was approved locally, and the Act 250 was approved, and both of those were appealed to environmental court. I'm not sure if they've been combined yet, but they're being heard by the same judge, I think. There were a set of a lot of legal maneuvering, and we submitted a motion to dismiss based on a set of things. That's kind of been the big push to kind of go and see whether we could get a large portion of it dismissed, mostly on the grounds that the DRB really doesn't have a lot of authority, and therefore you can't be appealing things that the DRB doesn't have authority over. And that's just going to come down to the determination by the judge. I think it's a good case, but I'm biased. We wrote the decision, so we wrote the local decision. So we are waiting. It was supposed to get a decision in August to September. They filed some counter motions to try to draw that out. So I'm still hoping to hear something in October.
So if you're trying to dismiss some things but not everything, there's no chance that this will resolve it.
It would to the most part. What we've, without getting too much into the weeds, there's an acknowledgement that the DRB has the right to regulate landscaping. So therefore, of all this list of things that they think that the DRB didn't do correctly, we think there's like one or two that, and that those haven't been points of contention. And if there is a point of contention, then the judge could easily make a case on, if we're holding up a large project, but for how many trees we need, then we can make a much quicker decision. So that's really, I think, where that's coming down to. But it's a much more complicated case than I can summarize. But that's a little bit where it is there's the appeal. We made a motion. They came back with a response to the motion, and it's now in the hands of the judge, waiting for a hearing that I don't know when the date is, and a decision hopefully
Okay, so that's it for item 3. Item 4 is general business, comments from the public. We have one member of the public here. Is there something that you'd like to say to the planning commission?
Hi,
Hi.
everybody. I'm Lisa Maxwell. I'm the new executive director for the Montpelier Corporation. So
Okay.
I'm here this week. I officially am on board November 1st. So I'm just learning and listening.
Excellent,
Good.
excellent. Well, welcome to the meeting, Lisa.
Thank you.
Okay, well, we'll move along then, and we'll look at the minutes from September 9th, so everyone can take a look at those.
Comments from the chair are good.
Huh?
Comments from the chair are good.
Oh, yeah, recycled, yeah.
It is what happens.
I mean, this isn't a correction, but just for the record in the future, she doesn't need to refer to me as acting chair. I think I was actually
Yes,
made
at
the
that
chair.
point you are now the chair.
Yeah.
And I, in this discussion of the boundary, it says the current boundary plus the parts of the designated downtown that are not included, these are required. But the current boundary isn't required, it's just the designated downtown that's required, right?
Yeah, I think
Where is it?
she.
It's a little bit
I think
confusing.
yeah, just the wording. These are required. I think just applies to plus the parts of the designated downtown that are not currently included, which includes a small part of Berry Street and a little around Miles Court.
And then I feel like, I think we did discuss the college
Yeah,
area.
Yeah,
we did.
So,
So, yeah.
So yeah, we definitely made a decision on the college area, so we should remove that from the minutes.
All right. Do you want to just add that to the paragraph above and say the college area was also discussed?
Changes to the college boundary were agreed upon, I guess, but by the way I'd say it.
Yeah, I think it should just try to be vague here, because we're not trying to, this isn't,
yeah.
Sure.
Changes to the college boundary were discussed.
Were discussed.
All right.
And maybe can we just change the first sentence there to say the parts of the designated downtown that are not currently included, these are required?
Let's see, how about made changes to the boundary to include all portions of the downtown district? Designated downtown?
Yeah, sure,
Yeah,
whatever.
these we don't need these are required.
did you catch what Aaron said, Mike?
So take out these are required and hit me one more time with that.
I would just say, the current boundaries were changed to include all of the downtown, designated downtown.
All of the designated downtown.
Yeah,
Right.
and then I would say, there's a discussion to remove 4 parcels from the district. And there's that list, East Main
Oh, okay.
Street,
Yeah.
St. Paul, and a small section of Northfield Street.
All right. So we don't need this, anything about the small part of Berry Street and Miles Court.
Yeah, I don't think we.
All right. Yep, I can make those changes.
So do we move the minutes as amended, I forget, or?
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, I guess so.
Sounds like a motion.
I
Sounds-
move the minutes as amended for approval.
Do we have a second?
Sure, I'll second.
Okay, Marcella seconds. Okay, those in favor of amending the minutes as indicated?
I
Aye.
Those opposed? Okay, that's great. Next item is related. We'll discuss next steps for design review proposal and the map. So first thing is, did it all make sense to you, Mike? You got the map?
Yep, I've got the map. I don't know if we need it, I've got it. But
I think that's
it made,
the best place that we've recorded what we discussed. I
Yep.
mean, you can put it into words, but it's much more
No.
difficult than the map.
no, the map makes sense, cause it did pretty much what we said we were gonna do, which was to make the parcels follow
Mm-hmm.
zoning districts or neighborhoods. I think staff, we were a little surprised when we saw that National Life was still in. So I guess that was just an observation. But
A lot of our discussion centered around the idea that it could be subdivided and that you could have commercial development go in. So it's kind of a looking forward kind of thing to keep it in.
yep, but no, that absolutely makes sense based on the neighborhoods we drew. That would make a lot of sense.
I think we also focused some of our discussion on it's a gateway. So
Mhm.
it sort of had some plus the
The regs.
the regs that we're looking at includes a separate section on the Western Gateway.
Mhm.
So we
Of course, I
figured-
think they just left it in because it was
Because it was there.
current, so it was there. So maybe a little back and
Yeah,
forth.
I mean
on
we
that
can.
one.
I mean it's something we can visit going forward.
But it certainly is one that provides a reasonable, rational basis that we can take to the public. Because the issue we've had is that our design review doesn't have a rational basis, so at least this has a basis. And I guess the next step then is, what do we want to try to do with this? From the standpoint of public input, do we want to go to council? Do we want to warn some kind of public input? How would we want to try to get?
I think we did anticipate a hearing just for this. We could do one of these meetings for it. So it doesn't take extra time. What do you guys think?
Yeah, that sounds probably the most efficient, just because we can then kind of tailor our. We can make any changes to the map based on that, and when we do take it to city council, we've got a better basis for our recommendation.
I think in the long run, if we didn't have a hearing, and there ended up being pushback later, that would extend the process. But if we have it now, in the long run, it'll shorten.
And city council can give whatever process they see fit to, so, right?
Yep. Yeah, eventually we're going to have the formal public hearings. I don't think this would be a formal public hearing at this point. We would just be putting out to get some general comments on it to start with, and then because we've got both the proposal and the map, so we're all going to have to really understand stuff and make sure the planning commission or the historic preservation commission is ready, because we're going to have to do outreach to the community and really understand what it means and get letters to the bridge and to the Times Argus so people can get a sense of what it is we're changing and what it is we're changing to, and that because that always makes or breaks these types of proposals. I don't think the map is making relatively modest changes, so I don't think the map will be an issue. We aren't looking to make big inclusions like we did in 2015, 16. We talked about really having a design review that went all the way up to College Street, where you're including a lot more properties. So, so what was our decision last time? I think we were talking about October, but I don't know if we're.
think October
What
would
are-
be good. Just get this out of the way so we can move on to the city plan.
Think about like the last meeting in October.
Sounds good.
And before that, you were saying we need to coordinate with the Historic Preservation Commission, like, so, cause they help answer questions. They
Yeah.
would be here for that?
They're the second. Yeah, we might want to put them
I think-
on our next agenda. So the first
I-
October meeting, we have a coordination meeting with them.
It would be nice to get the regs back from them so that the regs are sort of
Yeah, they're
formally
actually
in our possession.
You're actually waiting on Meredith and I to
Okay.
go through them, which both of us have been in and out on vacation. So we scheduled some time this week to work on it.
Oh, good. Will it be possible for by our second October meeting for historic preservation to have their regs sent back to us?
Yeah, well, I think it'll just be a matter of Meredith and I having something together. We should have something in advance though, so if we're gonna do that if we're gonna meet on the second meeting to talk about the proposal, we should warn the public meeting, cause we should have it out for the public to view and ask questions, and so we would move that to the 11th.
So it sounds like what you're saying is historic preservation doesn't really have any feedback for us from what we did last.
I think it was mostly Meredith and I were gonna go through, but I can work with Meredith to get the changes done, and historic preservation is meeting, I keep looking for the calendar that's not there anymore. The second Tuesday of October maybe? So, which reminds me, the second Monday is a holiday.
The 14th?
The 14th is a holiday, so we'll have to decide what we're doing.
Columbus Day.
Columbus Day. I just know that. Remember that. So yeah, let me see what we've got, because they'll probably be meeting on the Tuesday, and I can see what their timing is on we'll make changes, we'll get it back to them, see if they have any thoughts on what Meredith and I put together. And then meet back with you, with the planning commission for the second meeting in October. And then we'll warn the public input for the early November instead. Does that make sense? If you want input from HPC, they're not meeting any more times in September, so it would have to be their October meeting, and they usually meet the day after we do.
I'm okay personally with getting the HPC feedback and having the public hearing at the same time.
Yeah, can synthesize that stuff.
Okay. All right, then I will try to coordinate for the last meeting in October for our hearing on design review. And I'll try to see if I can get some input from them on making some outreach in support of their proposal, because I'm going to need their help to digest all the details of it and how they expect it to work. And if that goes relatively well, then we can decide whether or not we want to move forward on adopting it, or if we're waiting for guidelines, or if they're comfortable adopting them and moving forward with just the regulations and not the guidelines in place yet. That was what their next step was going to be.
Oh, yeah, writing the guidelines.
They're going to write a guideline booklet.
Yeah, it seems to me that the regs shouldn't be held up by the guidelines.
The guidelines sounded like a big project, like a
Yeah.
lengthy
Yeah.
project.
Right.
Yeah, it is a big project. But if the DRC, Design Review Committee, is comfortable implementing these rules without guidebooks, they don't really use the current guidebooks very much anymore because they were written in 1976. So they pretty much make determinations based on the letter of the regulations anyways. Okay, I will work with Meredith on that. And
That's great. So yeah, what might end up happening is maybe the November follow-up meeting is when we maybe figure it out and vote on something. But we'll get all of the feedback and information at that October hearing. And we have time to post for the public.
yeah, it's, as I said, I don't expect this to be a formal adoption hearing. I'm
Yeah.
not treating it like that. I figure this is just a public information, and if we get positive input, then we can move forward to adopting it and going through the formal process.
Yeah, we've been thinking of this as like a preliminary.
Yeah, just,
Yeah.
know what things we've got that look right, what things do people think need to get changed.
Okay, that's great. So we'll move on to the next item, which is Mike is going to give us the big update on what the staff's been working on for the implementation plans. And you have an example from the Historic Preservation and Housing for implementation plans for the city plan.
Well, I had some strikeout versions that I got.
And this was based off of the template that John created, right? Just, or a heavily modified version? Or?
This is actually based on, there was a model that I had created, and this is Historic. So Historic has already reviewed and approved theirs. Housing has had theirs for a while. I can hand it out, but they wanted to have one more meeting, so they asked me to
Do we have an extra one
come
for
back.
Lisa?
I've got an extra Historic. Can I have an extra housing? Keep this one. Historic.
These are kind of first drafts,
Historic.
sections of the city plan we're working on.
So I don't
We're
have an
very
extra.
early in the process of redoing the city plan, so this is some of the first feedback we've
It'll look
gotten.
familiar compared to the economic development one.
Yes.
So, it's not based on what John put in. It's actually, if you remember, I had done some implementation outlines of how we could do it,
Mhm.
and we had the example of the butterfly with rainbows and unicorns, and how things would
Mhm.
just as a way to get everyone thinking about it. And then we were looking, when you do the implementation, you've got to have your vision. What is it we're trying to do? And then break that vision into goals that are steps. And then the strategies we really want to start forcing into different boxes. Are we suggesting a policy change? What are our values? How do we spend our money? Is it a regulation? Do we need to regulate something? And if it does, then it has to meet certain rules. And then, is it a project? One Taylor Street's a project. It's something you do once. You don't build many One Taylor Streets. You only build one. So some goals you're going to accomplish by doing projects. Others are programs, things you do over and over again. Tax stabilization. First-time homebuyer programs. What's our problem and how are we going to fix it? We need to get, actually in the case of the first-time homebuyer program, it was how do we get more kids in the schools? We get funding from the state based on the number of kids in schools. So how do we get more kids in schools? Well, it's an expensive town to move here. How can we get young families to move here, being as expensive? So we have a first-time homebuyer program, which feels all warm and fuzzy. The nuts and bolts of it actually goes back to the fact that we just wanted to get more kids in school so we could get more funding to support our schools, and it works. And the fact that we give $10,000 to buy a house, and we get $17,000 per child that goes to school, so it kind of pays for itself relatively quickly. So that was the kind of the impetus behind it, but it is still a feel-good thing. We do want to work on it for affordability reasons. But That's the program side. So you have just different boxes that we try to fit things in. And the hope is that when you read it backwards or when you read it forwards, that you'd be able to go and say, all right, here's our goal. If we do our strategies, we accomplish our goal. And let's make sure that when we did these, we also looked back at all the things that we already do. Because in some cases, maybe we're doing things that are either counterproductive or not really useful at all. So we have a housing preservation grant program that's existed for 10 or 20 years, and it actually has a lot of money in it. But it wasn't doing any good because the program wasn't really set up to be successful. So how could we repurpose the money that's in that fund to better achieve the goals of what we wanted to do? So that was one of the things that Housing Committee was working on, was how could we take that revolving loan fund. Basically, it was a revolving loan fund that said we could only give money to people who couldn't afford to pay us back. Which it kind of defeats the purpose of being a revolving loan fund if I'm intentionally giving it to people who can't pay me back. You have to first not get qualified for a loan, and then we'll give you the money. So it wasn't the best structured program, so we found a better program that would help us to be able to support other organizations that fund similar programs. So it's a little bit easier for us to go through and say, hey, we'll match your grant that you offer for low-income people to fix up their house. If Capstone has a program, then we don't have to do the administration. All we have to know is Capstone has qualified applicant X for a grant. We can match that grant to help that president of Montpelier, rather than try to go around figuring out how to run a program on our own. So a lot of these, that's what they're doing, is what are we doing that isn't working or is counterproductive, and how can we do it better? And so that's what we did with the housing program, was to really, and they have a lot of goals. So housing is a more complex topic than, say, historic and cultural resources, where they have, I believe, they have a single aspiration, whereas housing had 4 aspirations. Historic and cultural resources has just one. And I worked with them, gave them a number of options. You could do it this way, you can do it that way, and they chose their aspiration. Then the goals break that aspiration into a number of bite-sized pieces, and then strategies to accomplish the goal. So that was how we worked with this one, and that worked the same for the housing. And as I mentioned, I have a draft for economic development that Lisa and I have just started to work on, and we'll work on more when she gets here. So that way we've got an economic development plan. I've started utilities and facilities. I have started a bunch on energy. The energy plan, we're putting in a municipal planning grant to really take the energy plan to another level. So,
by the way, does the energy, I'm assuming so, but does the Energy Committee know about the event that the Regional Planning Commission's putting on, Energy Summit?
Yes, I believe I forwarded those to Jamie, who is going to forward them on, but I can try to make sure we get those out. I think there's also a transportation forum that I sent to Kevin, our community development specialist, who works with the transportation committee, to make sure they've got that sent out to them as well.
Okay.
And we worked with was working with the Regional Planning Commission on their interest in doing parts of the energy plan, which they are interested in helping out with, because they have the expertise in doing what is the enhanced energy analysis, which is a requirement in order to provide comment to the Public Utility Commission. So I always remember these by their acronym, PUC. In order to do that, you have to have a energy plan that meets a certain level and has a certain number of analysis. So they're going to help us with that through the municipal planning grant, hopefully. But this was, as I said, this is one. My goal was to work with the different committees, start to get these implementation strategies together, and then start boxing them up and getting to you guys as they approve them. So as I said, historic is here, it's yours. You guys can start reviewing it. It may be easier to review in context with other ones. Housing hopefully will be approved next month, and so on. And I'm just gonna keep trying to crank these things out.
So when you say you're working on utilities and facilities, are you working on that, or is there a committee?
I'm working on, what I do is I put together an analysis, and I start to frame things out. So I don't necessarily write it out for them, but I put together a notes to go through and say, you know, this is what we're trying to do. I explain to them, I do the butterflies and rainbows thing with them and explain to them how we're trying to do this, and then I start to put some things out to say, this is some things you do already. Are there other things you could be doing that you're interested in doing? Are there things we should be studying?
No, I guess my question was more, are there sections of the city plan that don't correlate to a committee?
Yeah, utilities does not have a committee.
So you're just working on
I would be
drafting
working
something.
on that with the Public Works Department.
Okay.
And actually, which surprises me a little bit, Public Safety does not have a committee. All the committees, we don't have a Public Safety Committee. So that one will be another one that I'll probably work with the chiefs on, and then take to city council or get some input on what our policies and our goals are with respect to public safety. But we do have a community services committee, transportation, and land use is you guys. So that would be the other one. As we look to future agenda items, we started talking about it, and I think that was what John had some information on, using a little bit of that maintain, evolve, transform, looking at those maps. What do we want to see stay? What do we want to see things change? And I think what we would want to try to do is to start thinking about that in context of the land use, because you guys are going to be the ones to pull that together. And then we can see.
Okay. And, you know, we're going to have our chance also to modify the sections as they come in.
Yeah, and everybody's made aware of that. You know, I've told them it's not just, this is not the housing committee's plan, it is the city's housing plan. So in some cases there are things in here that they may not specifically do, but they're aware of what their role is. And then it's explained to them that once it comes here, your job is going to be to look at them and see how they relate to each other. Are there things that are missing? Are there things that are conflicting? You know, do we have things in the historic plan that conflict with the energy plan? Those types of conflicts or pieces. So I see that as a key role for you guys. And once we have the implementation plans, then we can go back. What I look at is going back to writing the chapters and I've explained to the committees that, you know, once we kind of know what our goals and strategies are, we can write a plan that's going to help tell the story, rather than just have a plan that's full of 500 pages of data and charts and graphs. We can actually spend a chunk, 1,000 words to 1,500 words that explains, you know, why housing is important and what are we looking at, and then link to these other plans. And if people really want to go, you know, if somebody's a real housing wonk, they can go at the barriers analysis from 2012 and the other studies that we can link to. But really what's important in the housing plan that the public would read is why housing is important and why our aspiration is what it is. You know, why is it important? Why do we, you know, why is one of our goals to have a healthy housing market? Well, because 90+% of the housing that you're going to live in is going to be from the housing market. So while it's important to have subsidized housing, and that's going to play an important and key role, we also have to make sure that we're doing what we can to make sure that the market is operating well enough that housing doesn't continue to get unaffordable, and that means making sure we have land available for housing development. And that's what they get into in their aspiration A. So, and we try to throw everything we can in here, and some of these things may end up falling out in the end because everybody wants to be a part of the tax stabilization program, and the city just goes and says, no, everybody can't get tax stabilizations, we're going to save this only for these things, in which case, even though it's in here as a proposal, this is kind of what they would like, knowing that somebody down the line, us, city council, may come in and go and say, no, that's, you know, we're not gonna amend our tax stabilization program to support X, Y, or Z.
This does seem like the best one to me.
What?
Housing.
Oh, tax,
Mm-hmm.
for the tax stabilization.
Yeah, to get more rental units.
Yeah, it's tough. You can't under state law. We can't, which I didn't know when I initially wrote this. We can only do it for commercial properties. So you can do it for commercial housing, but you can't do it for.
So it's to help with the rental market, not home ownership necessarily. But
Yeah, and technically it's only supposed to be for commercial and industrial. I would be interested in kind of drilling into
you're saying
the
in
enabling
this
rules.
case, rentals wouldn't be considered commercial. Is that what you're saying?
As if the rental has to be at least 5 units. I think at 5 units it becomes a commercial apartment under the tax assessing rules. I haven't personally drilled into the enabling rules, so everybody knows we're not a home rule state, so we can only do what the state says we can do. So if the state says you're allowed to give tax stabilizations for commercial and industrial, that's all we can do. We can't stabilize a residential property. But if we define commercial apartments as 5 or more, then it's a commercial property, and we can therefore give them a tax stabilization. But I haven't read the specific enabling rules to see how flexible the rules are in there, but it would be important to see, especially with the housing, because it's one of these things that lowers the cost. If what we're looking at, the reason why we don't get more housing built is the cost. It costs more to build than you can sell them for, unless you're building really expensive housing. So we've got to figure out how to bring the cost down, so that way developers can see a profit, and then they can turn and say, well, if I can get a return on my investment, I'm gonna spend $1 million to build a quadplex, knowing I'm gonna get the money back because I can tax stabilize the property for the first 4 or 5 years and get revenues in.
In this case, it would be only municipal taxes, right?
In this case, it would only be municipal taxes.
Which in Montpelier is high, so it matters.
Yeah, I think it's like 40% of your tax bill. So
Which is
Which is-
higher than just about everywhere else in Vermont.
it is, the overall tax bill probably is on the higher end. How high the municipal portion is. Yeah, I guess the municipal portion would be because we have more services, we have a higher municipal tax bill.
Yeah, and our schools are actually, I think, pretty good, staying close to average spending with the municipal part. So, I'm just pointing that out to say that Montpelier is a good candidate to use tax stabilization as a leverage.
Yeah,
device.
no, we used them very successfully when I was in Barrie. It's a you know, there's a lot of good programs, and so the other thing we've been trying to do with each one of these committees is to try to draw them out of their silos and try to make them think broadly about how you would, you know, what are all the tools, you know, that we could bring to bear on accomplishing our goals. If we wanted 150 more housing units, you know, we always point out, you know, part of my job, I'm responsible for trying to get 150 housing units in 5 years. But I'm not going to pick up one hammer, I'm not going to pound one nail, but I still have to figure out how I'm going to encourage 150 housing units. And that's the same way for economic development. I mean, how do you do it when you're not actually hiring? How do I get 500 more employees if I'm not going to hire anybody?
So I'm thinking one conversation we'll be having is whether 150 in 5 years is ambitious enough. Which, not to bring Mike's blood pressure up, it seems like we talk about housing a lot as a land use and just a, you know.
That was the number in the
development issue.
EDSP that was put in there. And we honestly, you know, we had actually thought about having the number higher, and then they pushed to go with the 150 in 5 years, which would translate to 240 in 8 years, because our plan's good for 8 years. So
What's the EDSP?
Economic Development Strategic Plan. So it's a plan, it was developed in 2016, that was intended, it created the MDC as the kind of the agent that would move the plan forward.
What's NBC?
Montpelier Development Corp.
That's
And so that's one of the ones. They had a number of pillars and a number of objectives, including trying to get another hotel in the downtown, and getting a number of housing units built.
Those things don't have to match, though, right? I mean, because
No.
that plan is from 3 or 4 years ago, so
It's going to provide
wanna be more
input
ambitious,
into
then it's
our
fine.
yes, yeah. That was the foundation that was built at that time. But if we have more aggressive goals, then we already know we're going to be closing in on 100 units pretty quick. Just with
projects that are already happening.
projects, 18. There was 18. There's the 30 for the transit center. That's 50, almost 50. We had 6 for Maple Tree Place there. We've got a couple other projects that have happened, smaller ones here and there. So
Well, we definitely want to make our aspirational goal something that goes well beyond what we know is definitely going to already happen, or most likely going to already happen.
well, keeping in mind, those happened after we adopted the plan in 2016, and in the 3 years we're closing in on
You're
on
talking
100.
you're talking about
Yeah.
how these are 100 that are going to meet that original goal.
Yeah, to
Okay,
meet the
sorry,
original
sorry.
goal of
Yeah.
150. So, we've had people who've come in. I know the city manager has thrown out numbers like, why can't we talk about 1,000 new housing units? I think it all comes down to what's the vision, what's the goal, what are our aspirations, and then we start talking about what would it take to get there, and are we willing to get there? Because, nothing's going to be free. So the bigger the goal, the more money we've got to put towards it, and how much money is city council and other folks willing to put. Housing is one of many goals. Having complete streets and building bike lanes, and having net zero by 2030 and the net zero community by 2050, each one of those is going to cost money. So at a certain point it'll come down to balancing, but that's not my job. That's I make recommendations, and everyone else has the hard job of making the decisions. But as where it is right now, this is where it is, and I think we can certainly, once it's in your hands, you guys are welcome to make adjustments to that, and I don't think the city council would be opposed to having more housing.
I'm not thinking of using incentives or spending money. I'm thinking the demand is very much there, and finding out what we can do to allow that demand manifest into housing. What do we need to remove from what's stopping people?
Yeah, I mean, certainly if somebody came up and had a 10-year proposal for the VCFA and Sabins Pasture parcel, and said, we're going to build, 250 units, I'm not going to say, well, you really should stop at 150 because that's our goal. I think we just think we need at least this much to start to tip the scale of the market, because right now there's nothing less than 1% vacancy rates, and houses stay on the market for days and weeks, not months.
Yeah.
So we just need to have more supply out there, so that way the price stops going up and up and up and up, making things more unaffordable. And maybe 150 won't tip the scale, but 150 was our start.
So, planning to plan. What do you think we should do as far as our work on this? Should we start going through the implementation plans one by one, or?
I would certainly take the time to go through, like historic and cultural housing. As I said, I got one more meeting on them, but go through and start reading historic and cultural. Understand what their goals are, understand what their aspiration is, and start reading the strategies. And this question came up, and I should remind everybody. The purpose of a lot of the highlighted pieces in these, the italics, was that when this is done, and this is, as I said, this is trying to not let great get in the way of good. Eventually, we would like to have these be hyperlinks. So this is going to be a digital plan, and that was what John and I had talked a lot about. Was we didn't want to make another paper plan. We'd rather have something that's online that people can really interact with. And so, if you were, at the bottom of this one, conduct a survey for archaeological sensitive areas and map the resources. That's an informational piece. But if somebody wanted to know, what is that? Why would we be doing that? You could click on that and get more information. But if we were to put all the information on that in each one of these, suddenly our implementation plan is really big. So the idea was just lay out what it is, and then if somebody wants it, they can click on it, and there'd be a much bigger description, or maybe you hover the mouse over it and it pops up into a pop-up box or something like that. That's the tech stuff that John knows as to what you could do.
Who's going to write that content?
I think that's something that would happen over time, because it's a chicken and egg. Until the plan's adopted, it's tough to write, because some of these go into multiple. Let's say zoning. Zoning may end up having a large amount of pieces just because the Unified Development Regulations touches on so many chapters. But if you were to click on it, it would be able to go in and tell you what these things are, or designated downtown may relate to a number of things, and you can click on it and understand more about the designated downtown program. But until this is adopted, I can't really reference back to, can't do the how it all connects until it gets adopted. Then you can go through and do the next level.
So you're thinking these links aren't going to be part of the plan. It's just more of like
They won't be active.
extra outside resources.
Yeah, they probably won't be active at the time we adopt the plan.
Okay.
The final piece that would go along with this, in my big world dreams of dreams, is so we adopt the plan, we've got the framework plan, it gets adopted, I can then start going through and putting together the hyperlinks and the pieces that we can just keep adding in over time to support that. And the last piece that I would like to see is something that a lot of other communities around the country are going to, which is to do videos. And I would love to, actually the Montpelier Alive hired somebody to do some videos for their stuff, and they were really good. I guess there was somebody who actually did this type of work in New York City. They either retired or they came up here, and so they did some work for them, and they were fantastic. And so if we could get somebody who could do the videos, there are places in Texas and a couple other communities that have done this, and they found that visits to their city plan websites, 83% of the traffic went through the videos. So people weren't reading the transportation plan. People were clicking on the transportation plan, clicking on the video, and then the video has a 10-minute video on what is the transportation plan, and what are the plans, what are the goals, and how are we going to do it. And it's a great educational piece, but again, that's another large step. But you can't do videos until you have the adopted plan. But I would eventually like to go through and say, hey, if we could adopt this plan in 2020 or 2021, and then look at 2021 and 2022 as opportunities to kind of backfill that with the supporting documentation that would really, if somebody wants to know historic or economic development or whatever it is, you could click on that and have that, and that should tightly reflect our 1,000 words description. The written word is obviously different than the spoken video word, so they're not going to match exactly, but you really want to have a written text that would be in the plan. But if you click on the video, you'll get a very similar presentation of the information.
I'm glad to hear you lay out like when we're going to do things, because I think previously when we talked about this, I feel like we've had like an eating an elephant type problem. Like, well, we're doing videos, and we're doing this entire plan, and we're doing website, and we're like, it just seemed like
it is way too much. But
so to think about, let's concentrate on the plan section by section and the chapters and the written part, and then the website links and the videos.
That's all
are
afterwards.
awesome things that we'll know we'll work on later. They don't have to be.
Yep. And if they don't happen, then people just have questions. You know, what do you mean archaeological insensitive? And they'd have to ask me or ask the Historic Preservation Commission, when you wanted to do that, why are you interested in that? And we can explain, well, it makes it easier for people to design projects for Act 250 if they understand where the archaeological sensitive areas are. And it's just, it's to help applicants in their process, but also helps the historic preservation understand if we have a lot of archaeological sensitive areas in the same place, then maybe we protect those by using a different tool, not regulatory, but Highgate, for example, has a lot of Indian burial grounds. So for them, understanding their archaeologically sensitive areas could be critical, not only for Act 250, but it may make sense to go through and say, you know, from an ethical, moral standpoint, maybe our best approach is to go through and purchase the development rights or purchase the property that these burial mounds and other things are located. But I don't think we'll have anything to that degree. I think for us it's mostly going to be understanding where our archaeological resources exist, and is there something we should be doing about it, something we should be, or is it just information?
Are you saying that Highgate and Barry is on archaeological burial grounds?
No,
Okay,
Highgate.
sorry.
No.
Okay.
The town of Highgate.
Oh, okay, sorry,
Yes.
I missed that. Okay.
Oh, I'm sorry. I should have been. I
no,
wasn't even
I
thinking
kind
of
of
that.
like spaced out for a second, and then I was like,
Wait,
whoa,
Highgate?
that's-
No,
Okay,
definitely
I'm
not.
just
No, the town of
curious
Highgate,
about
up
that.
at the
Okay,
Canadian
okay,
border
sorry.
on.
Random.
Yes. Yeah, so that's the sense. If you know, as I said, to read through it, and some of these you might go through and say, I don't understand what this is. It may come down to the fact that they understand what a certified local government is. You may have never heard of it, but the Historic Preservation Commission knows what it means, and they put it in there. And we just may have to explain some pieces to other people.
So then is the thinking that basically public comment will come from posting these sections when we're satisfied with them on the website? Or, given how interrelated some of the sections are gonna be, it sort of feels like it'd be hard, if we wanna not post things until it's all done? I'm just curious about the
That's
public.
that's a really great idea. Would it be possible, so we'll get these implementation plans, we'll go through them, add and subtract. Maybe then the next step should be to work something out with the bridge or something?
Yeah, or
Put
we
them
come.
in the bridge, and then we move on to the next one while we wait for comments?
That,
No?
I mean, I'm all for public input, but I've worked on some stuff not related to this, but if you have like a multi-pronged plan like this, it's, in my experience, it's better to have final finished package to comment on. You start putting out pieces, especially if you stagger them, the
Yeah.
release of them, you're just gonna get bogged down in sort of the give and take. Like, you give them a final package, people,
Okay.
my experience is the public tends to prioritize what's important to comment on, as opposed to giving them bits and pieces at a time where they're just sort of commenting as things come in and we'll just
Yeah,
get bogged down.
that's a good point.
I'm all for input, but it just seems more efficient to do it as a
Yeah.
final piece.
Yeah, I was thinking we would get a little bit of the comments out of the way early that way, but I think you're probably right.
Yeah.
It's just, it would bog it down.
Yeah, I worked on something like that, and we found that as we were putting stuff out, you would just get a slew of comments, and as you were grappling with that when it was coming back, you'd be pointing something else out.
Yeah, you're trying to
and-
amend the historic
and-
while you're
right,
trying to
you're-
present the housing, and
right,
then by the time
you're trying to figure out how you're going to fit this stuff together to begin with, like with what you have in place. You layer that on with public comments while you're trying to do that, it becomes impossible. So
That's a good point.
it's better to sort of redline a complete package and work on that, I think, than sort of redline
And-
while you're putting it together.
And we may be able to put together more coherent outreach for public input. You know, we may be able to bring in facilitators to go through and say, you know, we're going to do some, you know, let's present the plan.
Yeah.
This is what we've been working on. This is how we got here. But now we need public input. We can break people into breakout groups and be able to talk about, you know, if you're interested in historic and housing, and then we can switch people. You know, you may be interested in a couple of different things. We can rotate through.
Right.
And do that a couple times, you know, have 2 or 3 meetings, to try to help people to get some time to understand what we're doing, why we're doing it, why it's important. Because certainly this all ties back into being able to, each one of the committees is trying to look at this as, all right, what's my 8-year work plan going to be? And we're trying to go and say, look, you're not going to do your 8-year work plan here, but you do got to start thinking about what would you do? What types of things do you think you want to look at? And then
Yeah, how many of these implementation strategies are you?
there'll end up being 12.
12 of these? Okay.
Yep.
And that includes the 2 that are sort of outside the committees that you were talking about, public safety and utilities?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yep. Yeah, and it'll be close to 12. There's going to be one on governance that's not required, but I think there's enough that goes on in Montpelier that governance will be one that I'll have to work with City Council and the manager's office to put together. Yeah, historic, housing, energy, land use, transportation, utilities and facilities, governance, economic development. Now I'm starting to lose track of what
It's
I
okay,
already
it's
said,
not a
but
quiz.
yes.
It's fine.
But it gets you an
I believe
idea.
it.
Just think about the committees that we have, and a lot of times, we're going to be required to have an education plan, but I think that's rolled into the community services. Public safety, maybe that's separate, maybe that's rolled into community services. I don't know how they want to see that, but there are a couple of them that, so maybe 12, maybe 11.
And how are you thinking of doing the chapter writing? Is this something staff will do here, or should we personally work on writing any of that, or something else?
If there's always if there's people who want to work on it. Otherwise, it's probably something I was gonna try to continue to work on. It also may be something that we eventually try to draw in some additional help in the form of a grant if we decide to go through and hire a consultant to go and help put that together. It really depends on the amount of work staff and commissions want to put into it. If commissions go and say, hey, I'd like to write my own historic chapter, then we can say, okay, you've got 1,000 words,
Right.
1,000 to 1,500
So I was gonna
words,
get to is,
and explain the values. But I would probably want to do at least one that we would all review, and then go and say, here's the land use, just so you guys get a flavor of how we're talking about things. Just so we don't get stylistically 12 completely different.
Land use will be ours, so we'll write the chapter on that, and then that can be used as
Yeah,
guidance
then we can
for
say
others.
here's a guidance that you can kind of work from, because unless people, really it's the city plan. I mean, if people,
So you're thinking of the committees possibly writing the chapters then?
I was thinking I was going to do most of the drafting, and they were going to go through and do most of the editing to make sure it met there, because we wanted to get a single voice. It could always work the other way, that they write what they think, and then we sit down and rewrite it to go through and say, you told us this, but we've got to have this plan sound consistent, so we're going to rewrite what you wrote.
Okay.
But I'm open to suggestions. My focus has been on trying to do the implementation strategies, because I think there's a challenge and a little bit of an art to writing these, enforcing things, into their right boxes, and how to phrase things. Is it new? Are we continuing something? Are we amending something? Are we doing something new? And then, having specific things. So I've been trying to do this. Once it gets out of this, then I'm open to getting help writing chapters.
Okay. This all seems much more manageable than it one time did to me. So,
Yes.
Okay.
Especially when you hear that I'll be writing.
Yeah. So historically, it's always been handled by the planning commission chair.
I don't. The 1,000 words, like, succinct chapter thing, actually, that seems appealing to me.
Yeah, until there's
Yeah.
12 chapters and you've got 12,000 words.
Yeah, writing a short story doesn't seem. But.
Yeah, it's not as bad once you get going and once you get rolling. The issue that comes up is everything has to meet state statute. So eventually we have to talk about certain things, which means if you don't talk about it in those 1,000 words, we have to have it as a separate document that we link to it. In a lot of cases, we have this stuff. When we need to have a complete streets plan. Well, we already have a complete streets plan. All we have to do is link to it. And now we can expend our 1,000 words talking about why is complete streets important, and why is it important to you, the homeowner in Montpelier. What are complete streets? Why is it important? Why do we talk about it so much with our transportation plan? And I think that's more important than actually getting into the nuts and bolts of, are we going to have 2 sidewalks on Berry Street, or are we only going to have 1? And what are we going to do about East State Street? Well, we don't need to talk about that. That's in the plan.
Can you tell me the 12 sections?
All right.
Pop quiz.
Pop quiz.
So it
didn't make
Housing,
it a quiz.
Housing, historic preservation.
historic preservation, energy, economic,
utility,
utilities,
economic.
economic development.
Yep.
It's technically, I think they call it community services.
Okay.
Land use. Yeah.
I think you've actually showed us this before. It's coming back to me now.
Governance. Transportation, is that on there?
No. Three more.
Yeah, no energy is, or no, education is in community facilities.
Is this statutory?
Yeah, it's statutory.
I've seen it.
Well, a lot of them are statutory, but there are a couple of them that are outside. I'll probably kick myself because I probably have some that I've already written.
Something on recreation or?
Oh, natural resources.
Conservation Commission.
That's Conservation Commission and
Mhm.
Parks. That's where the recreation helped. I don't think recreation usually falls under community services.
No.
Just like our community services department, we have includes our senior center, recreation, parks, trees.
I'm just asking because what I'll do to follow up on this meeting is send everyone a sort of city plan timeline outline and go through to give everyone a heads up of how we'll be approaching it. And so if anyone's unhappy with that, then that'll give them a chance. But one of them will be to bring out the 12 sections, because we have I know we've discussed at some point or another possibility of adding additional sections. So
Yep.
I think listing them out might help.
I think public safety I had as a separate one, emergency services. One more, because I get an A minus. Are you trying to look at what I've sent you in the past?
Yeah.
Probably look it up online. It's 4382. Is that regional plan?
All right. Well, maybe I can figure it out later.
Yeah. So,
Okay.
anyways, that gets you a good chunk of them, and at some point, something will pop in my head for the last one. that we're
I think
missing.
it'll be good to lay out the plan so we can stop having meetings about planning, and actually stick to substance for all of our meetings from now on,
Yep.
and go through the implementation plans.
Yeah, if you start to being able to, like I said, if at the next meeting, ignoring, I don't know, like I said, I've got to figure out what the next meeting is. If the next meeting is actually 4 weeks from now, then that's the historic. Of course, maybe it's appropriate to review the historic implementation plan on the same day that we do a hearing on
So I
the proposal.
typically leave at 6:45, so
Yep.
we can briefly talk about the Columbus Day and whether we're
I'm not here, so I don't know if we're scheduling an alternate night to try to meet, or if we're just
think that
missing
would-
that meeting.
I think those are the two choices, it seems like, yeah. I don't feel pressure for us to have to meet that week. We're planning to do the hearing, as long as we have all of our ducks in a row for that. So maybe, like, if you'll be in touch with me, Mike, if anything comes up, if we need to do anything prior to that meeting. But
Okay. Yeah, because I'll try to lean on historic preservation to see if they'll do any outreach. And I can put out some stuff on your behalf to the press to go through and see if we can encourage input.
I was gonna ask you about that. Is that something, the outreach to the press, is that something that your office usually does, or do we participate in that?
Usually it comes out of the I guess the legal stuff always generally comes out of ours and getting warnings out, but if people want to advocate for things, that's certainly always your position on the board. You've got that right. I mean, when we were doing the zoning, we had a number of times, I think Kim would occasionally write stuff on his own, or Barb would write stuff to the papers, letters to the editor to go through and say, no, the public is, I'm seeing a lot of stuff in the papers about misrepresenting what we're working on the planning commission, and this is what we're working on.
Okay, so the notifications you're talking about for the Times Argus and the bridge are kind of legal public warnings.
Yeah, we would probably put one. Well, it wouldn't be necessarily a legal warning in some sense. It's just a matter of Jamie is kind of like our public informations officer. So anytime we're going to have a formal meeting, we'll go through and run it through her, so that way we've got enough meeting space. Should it be here? Should we warn it somewhere else? We'd probably try to have it here. I would just try to reserve the memorial room so we've got both sides in case we get a large crowd. And then get the formal things out to the Times Argus, so they've got a press release. But beyond the press release, it would probably be encouraging input from.
so no meeting on Columbus Day. We just won't meet.
sounds good.
There may be some emails
Yeah.
just about preparing for the next meeting.
Okay.
Do we need to formally adjourn before she leaves while we can, or do you just like leave it hanging?
No, we just can't vote on anything.
Okay.
Oh, I get
She's
what-
talking about
Or do we-
vote
She
to
can't
adjourn.
Or do we
vote
just
to
vote to adjourn?
How
I didn't even think about that. That's a good call. Jeez.
You
Sure.
vote to adjourn,
Well,
I'll go home.
we'll still be holding a working session, so I don't think we need to do anything formal.
Okay. Thanks.
Thanks.
Thanks, we're stuck here forever next to you.
Okay.
We're never gonna get out of
This meeting will never end.
Yeah.
Will exist always.
Had enough votes to open the hearing and not enough to
here.
end.
Yeah, exactly. It's this Kafka situation.
We're stuck in
Yeah.
meeting
Yeah,
purgatory.
exactly.
Yeah. Okay. Well, the only thing else on the agenda is to discuss the vision statement.
Which I should have looked at the agenda a little bit earlier to reprint that out, because I think I had forwarded it to you guys, but I
Yeah,
didn't
we
print
have it in
back
our
out.
email for sure. Well,
Yeah.
just
It was the thing
Just-
about like service.
Yes, it was all
Surveying
about
was-
service.
That was a few months ago.
Yeah,
But Leslie
Montpelier
forwarded
serves.
it. Yeah.
Oh,
Yeah.
Yeah.
okay, I remember that.
so yeah, that's not something we need to like work on right now, right? Like,
No.
what place does that have in the scheme of this?
I think we had that in the context of when we were starting the plan. I think maybe it was John was kind of talking about maybe we need to have an overall vision that we're starting with. And I mentioned that they had done this branding exercise. I couldn't remember what it said.
Oh, this was the Montpelier, a good place for humans or something. Is that? Or,
Yeah.
That's what it was. It was
The
like
branding thing.
Yeah, it was.
Yeah, it was
like-
a branding thing that had been worked on, and it was, I think it was good for what it was trying to do. I don't think it necessarily translates to our city plan effort, though, or at least that was
Great
my
for the
thought.
videos.
Can we just talk about doing the vision or plan to do the vision statement around the same time we write the chapters? Does that seem like an appropriate?
Yeah, I mean it's going to be, I think a a compilation of all of it anyways. I would think, I would have done it last. He wanted to do it first to kind of build. I don't think there's a right or a wrong to that. It's just, you know, just as we said, we're doing these backwards. We're, you know, most communities will write the text of their plans and describe all the analyses, you know, do all their graphs and tables, and then afterwards write their implementation plan. We've decided, you know what's most important to us? Having a strategic plan so we figure out what we're going to do to actually accomplish our goals, because Montpelier has a lot of goals and we never really talk about what it's going to take to do them. So let's start with that and work backwards. I think the vision statement can work either way. You can start with one or you can end with one.
I think we're going to be learning as we go. I just think that's inevitable, which means that we're doing it at the end is what makes sense, because I don't think we have a clear one going in.
Well,
Mhm.
either way, it can be a check, right? Like you were saying, you can read it backward or you can read it forward. So if we start backward, we just have to make sure that the vision statement ends up being what we want it to be. And if it doesn't, then you got to go back, lower it, and change goals or something.
Yeah, but so to use time well, though, I mean,
Yeah, no,
you know,
I think
yeah,
it's fine.
yeah.
I think it works both ways. We would just have to make sure that
Yeah,
we're doing
and it's the
check
same
we
way.
would
That's
do
been the
anyway.
hard part. That, like, when it came to the historic for me, working with the HPC, I don't know a lot of the stuff, so I've just got to throw stuff out there, and then eventually go and tell them we're going to have to knit this together. Whatever you have for your aspiration, we've got to work together with your strategies, and vice versa. You know, you can't have a strategy that doesn't help support a goal that you have.
Right.
And so we would work back and forth, and I think you're right. For the vision, it's going to work the same way, just on a much bigger scale.
Yeah.
That at the end we have to have a vision, and we look at the vision and everything underneath it doesn't add up.
okay.
And we will have 12
You'll have 12 of those.
aspirations or slash 12 buckets of
Implementation-
aspirations, and you could
implementation.
sort
Oh, I
of
see.
look at those for themes and
Yeah.
build that into a vision. Yeah.
Well, we'll have a lot more than 12 aspirations.
Right, yeah, because these guys
Yeah.
have several, so, but theoretically, those will kind of all theme
Yep.
generally,
Yeah.
and that can help.
Yeah.
We won't have nothing to go out, I think.
Yeah,
by
I
that
think
time.
we're gonna have a lot. I think we're gonna learn a lot through this process, as like the planning commission itself. If we were all like Mike and John and have all this background in planning, maybe we do know right now what we want to, you know. But I think, considering our variety of backgrounds, we're gonna learn stuff.
Yeah. And Stephanie did this in the past too, so she's kind of got some in there.
And guess who's not here?
Guess who's not here?
Right. Let's. I just, yeah. So I'm gonna put this outline out for us to sort of all be on the same page about where we're going, like as a plan. And I don't know if John will be entirely happy, because it seems like different visions of how we're going to proceed with this have been batted around. At least that's been my perception, and why I'm kind of confused about it. So I'm going to lay this one out there, which seems to align
And we
with
could
what
still
Mike's
do with-
planning to do.
We could still take what we have here and still plug it into. I think John has a lot of process pieces. He wants to do the web, which I want to too. I want to write this so we can get this and do an online plan.
And I think there's been some different visions about the process we'll follow. I'm going to lay this one out here, all I'm trying to do is basically align
Yeah.
with what you're doing, and you're the one with the full-time job doing this all the time, so it'd be wise of us to follow your lead anyway. So I'm just letting everyone know that just out loud that like that's what
Yeah,
we'll
if we
plan
lay
to
it out,
proceed
then at
by.
least we can, whether people agree or disagree, we can decide that's how we're going to proceed.
And hopefully we'll talk minimally about planning, and we can start talking about the actual implementation with our meetings. After that October hearing, yeah, we can start to maybe put on the agenda both, like you'll have housing done by then, right? So we can look at both of these, maybe
Yep.
that first November meeting. Okay. Okay.
And as I said, most of the energy plan may end up being one that we can kind of set off to the side. Because if we get the municipal planning grant to write that chapter, that's going to be one that there'll be an entire process to develop that. And we can task them with the whole I want your 1,000 words. I want your, if I'm paying you lots of money, this is what we want. Because they can do all the public input and have the really detailed discussion of how we're going to be net zero by 2030 and have a community net zero by 2050. And that's going to take an entire public process, and they'll take care of that.
Okay.
Bugs me, I can't remember that last one.
I'm going to put a small amount of effort into digging through my email to find the list. That I'm sure
I've got
it's
it downstairs. Yeah.
Okay, so that's what we're planning to going forward.
Can we just make
Mhm.
sure, I just wanna make sure I'm clear about, so we're not meeting on the 14th, but then the meeting after that, we're gonna have, if all goes to plan, historic preservation, maybe
28th
here.
would be, assuming the 14th is Columbus Day, then 28th would be the next meeting, and we would have a design public hearing on the map
Mhm.
and the presentation.
Okay.
We'll do some outreach. We'll try to get historic preservation to do some outreach, and then we'll have a meeting, see if we can get as much public input. I will try to reserve the extra room, so we've got both rooms.
Okay, and we'll talk about the regs and the boundary map.
Yep, the
Same
regs and the
meeting.
boundary map.
We'll get
and-
feedback from the public and from historic preservation,
Okay.
and then that'll just be taking it all in, and then the meeting following that, we'll decide what we do next, which most likely will be to make changes or not make changes based on the feedback we received, and then send it to city council
Okay. And in
to
terms
start the actual formal process.
Well, we would then warn a formal public hearing. We could either go to city council. I mean, I'll probably invite the councilors to the meeting, just so that way they can if we get enough of them here, we can ask them. I can poll them afterwards to go through and say, what did you guys think? Are you guys in support of making these types of changes? You know, are we just wasting time at the planning commission to adopt these things and give them to you if you guys aren't going to be interested in taking it up? So you can kind of get a poll from them. If there aren't enough of them here, then we may go through, have a public hearing, ask to be on the council agenda, go and meet at the council in December. That wouldn't take away from one of our work meetings, because that would be meeting on their night, just probably you and, you know, whoever wants to come. We can go and sit down, present to the present to council. Here's what we presented, here's what we heard, what do you guys think? Are you guys interested? Some of the squeakiest wheels will probably come back and give their version, which is fine, it's good. And then they can make a decision as to whether this is a good idea to move forward or not.
Okay.
And the process for our informal public hearing, we have a process for like getting feedback and giving the presentation. Will that be historic preservation, or will we be talking about?
I think we should.
Yeah, I'm gonna invite, we've got historic preservation's presentation that they gave us.
Yep.
And I missed that meeting as well, so we'll probably take a look at that and see if it's something that we can put back up, see if we can get historic preservation to be here for the meeting on the 28th, and
Yep,
then
okay.
and then we would do the presentation and go and say this is what's been presented to us, and if there's a spokesman from historic preservation that's willing to take some questions, I think that's
Okay.
helpful.
I think it's
Yeah.
helpful to have them, maybe there for questions. Meredith's also a really great resource.
Yeah, she
for those
knows
kinds of
quite a bit.
questions. But I think since we're the ones having to make the decision, I think
Yeah.
that
Okay.
this is going to be tough having a month between meetings. But I'll send you some ideas for the agenda for that night, and and we'll plan to start it off by doing an update or presentation from. I guess I'll do that on where we are with the regs and where we are with the boundary map, and explain our thinking.
Yep.
Are we
That-
able to meet on the 7th?
We would not be able, on the 7th, is DRC and DRB have this room.
Okay. never
So
mind. No, that's
it just
fine.
means we wouldn't be on television, we'd have to take and record our own minutes.
No, I'm just saying if it's a
It's not impossible, I mean, we
Yeah,
don't.
if it's
the
a
I would
Thursday-
only say it was going to be tough because it's just because I know
We'll just
that
lose
all
one.
of this information that's
Yeah.
that's in my brain right now is going to fly away
yeah.
in the next
No, I
month.
hear you. No, I was just thinking if
Um,
you, I think
yeah.
there's some value to kind of keep focus as best we can.
It's-
but
I
it's
mean-
not that big a
I'll
deal.
just have
The
to.
rooms unavailable.
I'll read it up that
And-
day. And
Well, I
prepare.
mean, I can get other rooms. I mean, there's a community room over in the police station. the worst case scenario is you're down in the zoning office where we've got a table that can sit 8 or 10. We just have to make sure we've got some signs. But there is a 30th, so this is September has 5 Mondays. So actually, if we were to meet on the 7th, it would be 2 weeks from today.
Yeah.
And the 28th is actually 5 weeks from today.
Yeah.
So it's not as crazy an idea as you might
Yeah,
think.
it doesn't pull us out of sync that much.
So
Some materials to review later.
What's going on?
so if you want to try to if we do want to try to meet on the 7th, you have to just give me
I'll be out of town
notice.
on the 7th.
Okay. Unless you want to be chair for a day.
I don't mind that at all. I'm just wondering if there is some want to
It's been,
kind of keep us
yeah,
focused on it.
we haven't seen Barb in a few weeks either. It'll be quite a while. She might appreciate getting back up to speed, or I don't know. I could be wrong about that.
Do we want to just poll? I mean, considering there's only 3 of you left, do you want to poll the
Can we
rest
poll-
of the commission? Just go and say, hey, who's interested in meeting on the 7th?
Yeah, we can do that without any. There's no public.
Yeah, that's just
Yeah.
That's just a
Yeah.
polling. As long as
Yeah,
you're
and-
not discussing policy,
Yeah, I
it's
think
just
that's probably
setting
a
the
good
meeting.
idea.
If you guys want to poll,
Do you have a sense of what we would have on the agenda for that? I mean, I'm just trying to. What's going to happen between now and 2 weeks from now that we could kind of chew on?
I was maybe just sort of in advance of preparing for the 28th.
yeah, we have some information to prepare for the 28th, and we
Make
could
sure
we could
everybody's on the
review.
same page.
I mean, you guys have the final
Yeah.
historic. We could start reviewing that piece. We could review what Kirby sends out on the calendar and the FYI. This is how we're going to do the plan adoption process. And here's our plan adoption process, and here's our design review potential process.
That actually sounds all right.
Okay, I'll include that in the email.
Okay.
Yeah. So do you want me to send it out, or do you want to send it out? Or what do you wanna do?
I'll include it in the email, and then you could like follow up if you wanted to say, hey, you know, to draw attention to it, because it's going to be a lot of stuff in my email, so you could. It's basically what I'm saying is we
Okay.
both do it.
All right, I'll follow your lead. Let's get it done.
Okay.
All right.
And I can certainly meet.
Yeah, and then
Oh,
all for naught.
all for naught. I definitely won't be able to on the 7th. Sorry. That's my
More
bad.
hay?
Not more hay. It's my anniversary.
Oh,
so
well, I
You did a really great job
I will-
remembering
Yeah.
it before the meeting was over.
Well, just
That's
going
really-
just going by the numbers.
No,
like,
no, you
hey,
gotta-
don't worry about it. We got Columbus Day weekend.
I'll still include it, but
Yeah, well-
it would just be without Mike.
yeah,
so-
well, yeah. I'll frame it up in a certain
Okay. All right. So I think with that we can adjourn. Got through our agenda for the
Can't
night.
even vote. Can we even vote
We
on it?
can't
No.
vote.
Yeah, you
We're
vote
just,
on it, you just leave.
Yeah.
we're just going to end
Goodbye.
this meeting. An Irish goodbye.
Oh, is there anything specific I should be prepared to say at the meeting on Wednesday, the city council meeting on Wednesday? Are they gonna ask me, like, why do you wanna be on the?
They might.